guys, welcome back to another evening in the Stormcave, where stories live and breathe and memories centered around sharing those adventures together are cherished. I'm your host, Grant Walker, and I'm here with my co-host, Jenelle Schmidt. Jenelle, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to today's podcast. Last couple ones have been really fun. Today, we are going to talk about shows that we're watching. Now, this is an interesting topic for me. Janelle, you probably know this about me, but I have a really hard time getting into shows, not because I don't enjoy them, but because I have a hard time not completing something in one sitting, which makes it really hard to read books or watch longer movies or watch TV shows. But there are a number of shows that we are watching together as a family that I'm really enjoying, shows that we have just finished watching or are in the middle of watching. And so we want to talk about those today because it's just another form of being able to share stories together as a family. It's really fun.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of funny coming from a guy who's one of your favorite movies is Gettysburg. But
Touche.
but it's funny because that's always been something where like that's just different between you and me because I will recommend a TV show and you'll watch like 2 episodes and be like, yeah, I love it. And then I'll ask you, like, did you finish it? You're like, no, it's been 10 years.
That is the way I am. But
Yeah.
I am excited to talk about these shows today. And your kids, we've talked about this before, your kids are at a little bit of an older stage than my kids. So our shows are probably at a little bit different level, but I like that because it allows us to look forward to things that we can look forward to. And also families listening in, your kids might be at a different point. And there may be some disclaimers. We try to talk a lot about the stuff that we love on this show, but sometimes we watch a show or read a book that is not our favorite or that we enjoy, but there has to come with some disclaimers maybe.
Yeah. And the great thing about our kids being all different ages, because you got all the way down to almost 2-year old now, right? Is
Yeah,
Livia turning 2 in May?
she
Wow.
is.
And then I've got a 16-year-old. So we kind of have a whole range. And so hopefully as we talk about stuff that your family is liking and stuff that my family is liking, people be able to find something for whatever stage they're in.
Absolutely. And we have joked about this in past episodes and joked about this many times. You get so excited about wanting to share certain things with your kids, but trying to figure the right time. I was talking with our sister Brittany the other day, and she is watching the show All Creatures Great and Small with our parents, which is a show that we will talk about in the future. And it's a show that I love. I think it's one of the most beautiful shows out there, and nothing inappropriate, but it is one that I think you have to be probably a little bit older to appreciate. And so it's one that I'm looking forward to showing my kids, but I want to make sure they're old enough to appreciate the storyline. It's not super exciting, doesn't have a lot of action, but it just has beautiful characters. It's a beautiful story and just beautifully told. So it's one I'm looking forward to, but my kids aren't quite to the age where they can appreciate it. But sometimes we push the envelope a little bit. Talked about this, how my daughter Reese grew up with Daniel Tiger. And then my son, Wyatt, my second born, he grew up with PJ Masks. And Luca, my third, grew up with Jurassic Park Camp Cretaceous. And I think it shows in their personalities. Not exactly, but it's a lot of fun. And there's a lot of shows that I am looking forward to sharing with the kids. And it has been really fun to get into some of these shows where it's still fun. The shows I'm going to talk about are cartoons, but they are starting to deal with topics more seriously, not necessarily serious topics, but the first show I want to talk about is going to be talking about good versus evil in a way that is serious, where good is good and bad is bad. And it's very clear. It's not a lot of gray area in there, and it just deals with it in a very real way. So it is serious. And I like that. I'm enjoying that and getting into those kind of elements with my kids. And Janelle, last week I was trying to figure out you have dived into that already.
Someday this is going to be a bit.
Yes. Indeed.
Find the grammatical error in every single episode. It will always be the same word.
That's right.
Dived.
I
think. I believe dived is correct.
I have dived. I'm diving. Yes. Anyways, let's start with you. Okay. What's the first show that you guys are watching as a family or have recently watched as a family that you're really into or getting into or have been into for a while?
Yeah, for sure. So when we started talking about what we were going to write about or what we were going to talk about today, I got excited because we are actually in the middle of watching my all-time favorite television show of ever, and it's Stargate SG-1. And we're walking through it a little on the slow side because we keep getting distracted by new shiny things, or people want to different children want to watch different things. And so Stargate SG-1 is one that we are watching as a family. I think we might be in season 5 now, and there are 10 seasons of this show. So if
Oh
you're
my
looking for
goodness.
something that will just take you forever, this is it. And I'm really excited about getting to Stargate Atlantis at some point because I also love that show very much. That one's a little on the creepier side, though. I think it's good that we're getting through Stargate SG-1 first. The premise of the show begins with the idea there was a movie called Stargate. It was made in 1994.
Kurt
It
Russell
had
in it,
Kurt
yeah.
Russell in it. Yep, Kurt Russell and James Spader. And they're both very young in that movie, so it's kind of fun. Kurt Russell plays Colonel Jack O'Neill, and James Spader plays Daniel Jackson, and he is the archaeologist. So you've got they discover this ancient device in Egypt, and they figure out that it is a portal that connects a wormhole to another portal on another planet. They go to that planet and they discover that there is life outside of our planet, and that there is a threat coming. And so then the show kind of spins off of that. And the Stargate program has begun, and there are all these different Stargate teams, SG teams, that are now being sent through the wormhole to other planets in an attempt to seek out allies and technology and a way to protect Earth from these bad guys, the Goa'uld, when they eventually get here, when they eventually realize, oh, that planet still exists and it's got this thriving population, and the Goa'uld want humans to be their slaves. So that's kind of the premise. And you have Richard Dean Anderson is playing Jack O'Neill, and Michael Shanks plays Daniel Jackson. Christopher Judge plays Teal'c. Teal'c is the alien on the team. He used to serve the Goa'uld, and he has joined the SG program. And then you have Samantha Carter, who is played by Amanda Tapping, and she is the scientist. She's also in the military, but she's just absolutely brilliant. And so you have this team, and they go through these portals, and every single episode is an adventure, mostly standalone adventures. There is obviously an overarching plot, but the first season or two is just kind of, we're going through the wormhole and we don't know what we're going to find, but it will be interesting. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's explosions, there's action, there's teeny bit of romance here and there, but mostly, and there's just a lot of humor, and the humor is all witty and kind of back and forth type of humor, which I prefer to crude humor always. The show really has everything. And one of the things that I love about it is just the character arcs that you get. Like, these characters are fantastic. They're all very different, and they all come with their own views on how the world works, how the world should work. So you have Jack, who's the military man, but he's also got a little bit of a problem with an authority, which is funny because he is the authority on the team. And he's just the kind of guy who's like, let's just blow it up and ask questions later. Meanwhile, you have Daniel Jackson, who is the archaeologist and the anthropologist, and he wants to know all the things, and he thinks that everything can be solved with just a really good conversation, right? And so what I love is that the show never tries to show one of these viewpoints as being better than the other. There are definitely episodes where Daniel's attempts at diplomacy totally fail, and nobody's going to listen to him, and Jack has to bail him out. And then there are other episodes where Jack just wants to be like, that's it, we're getting out of here, we're going to blow everything up, and Daniel calms him down and forces him to talk, and then diplomacy does rule the day. So I like that they let both of those characters have that personality as strengths, and the show never tries to tell you Daniel's right or Jack is right. It's like, in this circumstance, Daniel is right, but in this circumstance, Jack is right. And I think that's kind of a cool thing that I think storytelling has lost a little bit, in that we don't just allow for there to be differences.
For sure. So
yeah.
in the show, you've mentioned the characters. Who's your favorite character in the show?
Oh, that's really hard. Probably be Daniel. Daniel's probably my favorite, but it's a real close toss up between him and Jack. And Teal'c is great. Christopher Judge just does such a good job playing the stoic, warrior who kind of has no sense of humor, and Samantha is fun and quirky, and you kind of start realizing that she's a little bit of a nerd. Even though she's portrayed as being beautiful, she's also very nerdy and a little socially awkward at times, which is funny. But yeah, I love all the characters. I think that's part of the reason I stuck with the show as long, you know, through all 10 seasons, and have watched it. This is my rewatch show. This is probably the fourth or fifth time I've watched through it.
Oh, wow.
So I do have to say there is a tiny caveat on this show. 10 seasons is a lot of seasons. And every episode, I would say, is family friendly, except the pilot. The pilot episode the show originally aired on Showtime.
Okay.
And the writers and directors were forced by the television company, the broadcast company, to put about 3 minutes of a full nudity scene in that first episode. After the show finished, the 10 seasons came out, the writers and directors went and recut and re-edited that pilot episode to take that out. And they told everybody that they never wanted it in there. It wasn't their decision. Showtime was like, no, this has to be in there. And so they went back and they re-edited, released it as a single standalone DVD called The Children of the Gods, which was the name of the pilot episode. So if you're going to watch it with your family, especially if you're going to watch it on Amazon Prime, where you can stream it for free if you have Prime, that first episode, they used to have it as the new edited version, but now it's back to being the original unedited version. So if you're going to watch it with your family, around 1 hour and 2 minutes, you want to skip ahead 3 minutes. You miss nothing. Then you don't have to see that. If you don't just want to not deal with that at all, I would recommend trying to find the DVD that has the edited final cut, Children of the Gods, so that you can watch it. And then the first episode becomes as family friendly as the whole rest of the show.
So how do your kids, so you have 2 older daughters and then 2 younger boys, how do they like this show? What are the things that they like about it? How has that been sharing this? Because if you said you have watched this now 4 times through 10 seasons, obviously this has been fun for you to start sharing with your kids. How are they enjoying it?
They are enjoying it. I would say they probably don't love it as much as I do, but some of it is meant a little bit for an older audience. There's some politics, there's some intrigue, this is the way the military works, and so there are some things that I think go a little over their heads that I think they'll enjoy a little bit more as they get older. When we first started watching the Goa'uld, so the Goa'uld are like these snake-like worm creatures that inhabit people, and then they make their eyes glow. And so when they're inside a host, they're not creepy because it's just a person who has a really weird low voice and their eyes glow occasionally to let the audience know that this is a bad guy. But when you see the Goa'uld outside of a host, they're really creepy and awful. So that was a little scary for the kids. There's like some medical stuff as they're trying to get a Goa'uld out of a person in episode 2. So we ended up just skipping that episode because my second daughter at the time just couldn't handle the medical side of it, which I understand because I pass out every time I get a shot.
Yeah, I hear you there. Who do you think this show would appeal to the most? Maybe even some ideas of other shows or movies or books that would be similar genre. When I listen in, I have seen the movie and enjoyed it, but I don't think I have seen much of the show. Maybe a couple episodes here and there, and I've enjoyed it. Just, it's one of those shows where it feels like such a massive commitment. And again, I told you, I have a hard time committing to something unless I know I can finish it, because I have to know what the end is. Even if it's a movie that I don't care for at all, I have to sit through it to know how it ends.
Right.
So who would the show appeal to? And you were talking about how much you love the characters, and I think that is such an important part. There's so many shows that are in genres that I'm not super interested in, but if I connect with the characters, I can be pulled into just about anything. It's very similar, I think, to remember in high school or college, some of your favorite classes were subjects that you didn't even like, but you love the teacher. And so you love the class. And I think that's true with characters in shows. We say this often. I would be hard pressed, or think it would be hard for anyone to name a show, a book, or a movie that they love that didn't have characters they loved. And it would be hard to find a story where you didn't like any of the characters, but you thought it was a great story.
I
So
would agree with that. Yeah.
who does this show appeal to?
If you love old sci-fi, if you love, but not like super old. So like if you love things like Star Trek The Next Generation, I think this show would be up your alley. If you like a little bit more adventure like Star Trek Voyager, this story would be up your alley. Maybe if you like Andromeda, this show is way more family friendly than Andromeda. I love Andromeda, but I'm not ready to show it to my kids. So maybe stuff like that. If you like long form fiction, if you like a story that's just you're just going to be immersed in it for a very long time, because yeah, again, you can't just binge 10 seasons
For sure.
and these are old school season lengths where it's 22 to 26 episodes. I mean, we're talking over 200 episodes of television here. So it's a lot. And it's, hey, if that's what you want to do as a family and sit down and watch through a show, it'll take you a while. So me, I've always been a fantasy fiction reader, which means that I love series. And I think it's funny, you like to be able to finish something. I just want to spend one more chapter with the characters,
Yeah.
right? I want to spend more time with these characters that I've fallen in love with, and TV shows let me do that in a way that movies don't tend to. And
For
so
sure.
that's why I tend to be like, yeah, let's sit down and watch all 6 Lord of the Rings, or let's go through all 8 of the Harry Potter movies, because I get to spend time with these characters that I've fallen in love with, and I don't have to get to know someone new. And maybe that's the introvert in me where I'm like, I like these people and I want to hang out with these people some more.
Yes, and I totally understand that. And it's just hard for me to get into them, but when I do, I absolutely understand what you're saying. There were a number of people that I've talked to after watching the third Lord of the Rings who felt that the end just dragged out, whereas I'm sitting in the theaters hoping that it'll just keep going. So I totally understand wanting to spend more time with the characters, spend more time in the world. How is the story broken up? So I'm thinking of some of the shows that I have seen in the sci-fi genre where it's very episodic, where you could kind of jump in, you get a full story in an episode, but it can possibly be all part of a bigger story. So if you have 10 seasons, is there stuff in season 1 that is not resolved until season 10? Or is it fairly episodic to where you could kind of jump into it? Or is there a very overarching storyline that you're kind of following as you go through? I'm sure with any television show, you're going to have episodes that may not have anything to do with the main storyline, but is there a storyline that goes through that takes you from season 1 to being concluded in the last season?
I would say that, and I don't know exactly where the breaks are, but each season is kind of a self-contained overarching story. Like I said, season 1 is a lot more of that old school episodic style of story where you could jump into any episode in season 1 and get a little bit of an idea of, okay, this is who these people are, this is what they're doing, and it's very self-contained. The first season is very formulaic, right? They are sent on a mission. They go to a brand new planet. They meet some people or they find some ruins, and then something bad happens and then they have to solve it. Like, that's season 1 in a nutshell, every episode. But as you get closer and closer to the end of season 1, I think it's the end of season 1 is when you start realizing, no, there's a big threat and it is coming to Earth, and we have to resolve that. Now, if you were going to jump in and just start watching not at the beginning, I don't understand people who do that. So I don't have a whole lot of advice for you, but I would start at the beginning of a season, whichever season it is. The Goa'uld arc is kind of overarching through about maybe the end of season 6 or 7. And then there's like another set of bad guys. And then right around I think it's season 8 was when Richard Dean Anderson, his character kind of retires from being on active duty and becomes the general of all of Stargate Command. Then they bring in a new leader for SG-1, and that's, I think his name is Ben Browder. He does a good job. I didn't think I was going to like him because, again, hey, give me back the character I was hanging out with for 8 seasons, but he endeared himself to us pretty quick. And then that's like a whole new like 2-season arc of who they're fighting. And then there's like 2 or 3 slightly long episode movies that they came out with to wrap up the whole story. So it is a commitment. It is a time commitment if you're going to watch through everything. But I would just start at the beginning and go.
Also nice. I was thinking that recently, even just for Angelina, my wife, and I, trying to find something to watch. Whenever we finish a show, there's always a period of time where we try a bunch of different things and maybe even get a couple episodes in before we realize, ugh, I don't even like this. I'm just trying to find something to put on. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of nice to have something to know, hey, we know what we're going to watch every night for the next 11 years.
And because it's so episodic, especially at the beginning, and even, it is an older style of storytelling in television, right? We've gotten to a very like everything's overarching. Everything is, a cliffhanger at the end of every episode. So this kind of takes you back to that. You can watch an episode and then you can go watch other things for a while and then go, oh, I don't know what to watch. Oh, we'll watch another episode of Stargate, and just kind of, you can go through it a little slower because it's not quite so, everybody was about to die.
Now, 10 seasons is a long time, but with any show, if I'm trying to share my excitement about a show or a movie, series or book series, I always want to take people to a certain moment or a certain episode. Do you have a favorite episode or a favorite scene or favorite moment that you like to share with folks? I think you had shared a scene with me. I think you've shared it with Dad, but there's a beautiful scene in Doctor Who, which is another show that I have never seen anything. This is the only scene I've ever seen from it. But just this scene by itself has always intrigued me. And it's that scene where they bring Vincent van Gogh to the future. And he's really struggling. He's in his time struggling with depression, struggling with just feeling like his art isn't appreciated or valued or that he has any real purpose. And they bring him to the museum where his work is on display. And he's talking, I think, I don't know if he's talking.
They let him, they go up to the museum curator and they ask him a few questions about Vincent van Gogh. Like, what would you say about Vincent van Gogh? And Van Gogh is standing there kind of with his back to the guy. They kind of have him turn away so that the guy isn't distracted, so that the museum curator can just talk and not go, wow, you look a lot like this person I'm talking about who lived hundreds of years ago. And he just talks about how he would say that Vincent van Gogh is the most brilliant, most talented painter of his time, of potentially any time, and how his work is a defining moment of the artistic world. And oh yeah, I get chills every time I think about that scene. I watch that scene. It's such an encouragement as a creative, right? Maybe a discouragement if you think, oh, nobody's gonna care about my stuff until after I'm dead. But it's beautiful. Like, anybody who would be interested in watching Doctor Who, I'd start there. Yeah, and then I go, okay, let's go back to season 2. You don't start at season 1, you start at season 2. You can go back and watch season 1 after you know that you love the show.
Yeah, it's such a moving scene. And yeah, it brings me to tears because it is beautiful on a number of levels. So going back to Stargate, are there episodes or moments that you love?
Yes. One of the things that I love about the Stargate show is the humor. I love a show that makes me laugh. I love a show that makes me cry. I love a show that makes me, like, go, oh, that's beautiful. But my favorite episode of Stargate SG-1, I don't know what season it's in. I can find this information and we can put it in the show notes. But it's an episode where they get stuck in a time loop, and the only two people who know that they're in a time loop are Jack and Teal'c. And these are the guys who do everything with their muscles, right? Jack is smarter than he lets people know, but he's not the scientist. He's not the archaeologist. He's the commander, right? And so they get stuck in this time loop, and he has to every day, he has to explain to everybody in the entire Stargate command that they're in a time loop, that they have to decode this set of hieroglyphics that Daniel brought back pictures of. And so he is learning an ancient language, and he's having to catch Daniel up every day on it. And he's so just frustrated. And at one point in this time loop, Daniel makes a comment about how, this must be frustrating for you. And Jack is like, you have no idea. And Daniel's like, have you ever thought about just taking a cycle off? And Jack is like, what? And Daniel goes, well, I mean, if you know that everything is going to reset in 12 hours, you could do whatever you wanted. So then there's a whole series of Jack just being like, I'm taking this cycle off. And so he goes through a whole bunch of different things where like he he's golfing into the Stargate, right? And he and Teal'c are all dressed in like golf clothes and they're just golfing. And General Hammond goes, "What are you doing?" And Jack is just yells back at him. And anyway, it's very funny. And it also kind of shows like how much Jack cares because he doesn't even think of that until somebody mentions to him that you could.
But also shows kind of what you were talking about earlier, where you have these characters with different personalities
yeah.
and realizing there's a time for each of them, and cool to see how one character can share their personality with another one and have them be like, oh, I could do that.
Right. Yeah. And just the way that these I think any moment where there's a lot of places throughout where Jack will be doing something and Daniel will go, Jack, and Jack will just turn and go, Daniel. And so there's this whole Jack, Daniel thing that goes in a lot of the episodes. It's not an every episode thing, but they're both kind of like, what are you doing? And Jack is like, let me do my thing. I am the leader here. And it's great. I just love all the character dynamics. I love the humor, the action, and there's so much heart in this show. It's just moments of beauty that kind of hit you by surprise because so much of it is action and funny.
Yeah, I love it. I will have to check that out.
But like I said, an hour and 2 minutes, skip forward 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Sounds good. Or find
the cut version.
DVD version. Fair enough.
Come over and borrow mine.
Right on. Right on. Well,
so what was your first show?
The first show that we just finished, and I don't know, I call it a show just because it's coming out in a series fashion. It's probably more like a mini series. This is funny. I used to think that it was miniseries and that was just a word. And so I was like, oh, they like a TV show that's, kind of short is a miniseries.
And sounds a little bit like Misery.
Right. Well, it was fairly recently that I looked at it and was like, oh, mini series. So I would call this more of a mini series, and it's coming out right now, and it is the Wing Feather Saga, and they're releasing these. So it's a cartoon, or it's an animated series based off the Wing Feather Saga book series, which we just finished reading. Oh, I would guess last summer. And you had given us the Wing Feather Saga series of books probably 2 years ago, and we started reading through them. I had never heard of them before and had talked to you a little bit about those books. And it went just exactly how you said. You told me that when you read it to your kids loved it, but you weren't really into it in book one. Book one, there's a lot of silliness. And then book two, similar, but starts to get a little bit more into the plot. And by book three, it was one of my absolute, I would say at the time, it was the funnest series of books that we read through as a family because the kids were into it from the beginning. And books 3 and 4 are spectacular in my mind. Beautiful, beautiful story, wonderful characters that you just grow to love. And when the book series ended, was so almost heartbroken that it was over. Wanted to spend more time with those characters. Speaking of what you were talking about just a little bit ago. So recently, within the last year, they have started releasing an animated series based on the books, and they've got the first 2 seasons done. They're coming out kind of slowly because it's being done, I believe, by Angel Studios, and so it's kind of a crowd-funded type of deal, and so they're not coming out really quickly, and so we're wondering when the season 3 will come out. And they're not super long series, I think, or long seasons. I think it's probably 7, maybe 8 episodes, and each episode, I believe, is about 35-40 minutes. And I would say so far, so we've watched the first 2 seasons, I would say it's gone very similarly to the books. I've really enjoyed it with the kids. It's a different style of animation, so it took a little bit to get used to that, but I like it. It's very unique, and some of it is beautiful. The first season, I would say, had moments that I loved, but I felt like it spent a little bit too much time on some of the silliness. And there was a few moments where you started to see that, contrast a little bit, or that switch to more of a, I don't know if it's serious tone, but just like taking it seriously. And season 2 had a little bit more of that. And so I'm excited for the last 2 seasons just because of how much I love the last 2 books. And I hope that they kind of shift more into it. Sometimes when a book gets turned into a show or a movie, you see this a lot in sequels where they take something that people love. And I feel like sometimes the people who create these things don't understand what it is that we love about them. And so they take elements of the story and just, more of this. It's like, well, that's not what we like. But
so true.
Some more of that other stuff. So it's really hard to make something good. But I've really enjoyed it. The voice actors are great. The guy who plays grandfather, Podo, is played by Gibbs from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, nice.
And he has got a voice for telling stories, so that's great. And I believe Merry or Pippin from Lord of the Rings is the overseer in this most recent scene. You would never recognize it from his voice.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
He does a good job. And again, it just comes back to really loving the characters in the books. Just love the 3 main characters, Janner, Kalmar or Tank, and Lily, because they are so good. They get put into really difficult situations where they need courage and honesty and love for their brother or sister. And they always come through making the right decisions. And the end of the story was not what I expected. The pages got a little blurry at the end. I don't know why that is. That happens sometimes.
I know.
But 100% wholeheartedly recommend the books to families. I have recommended them to a few families where the kids were a little bit younger, and they felt like it was a little scary.
Yeah.
Which I totally understand, because especially as it gets farther into the series, it does. It gets the stakes are high, and the good versus bad dynamic is very much there and real, which I love with where my kids are at, as we're kind of starting to be able to deal with those kinds of themes in a way that's really fun. But I would also say it's possible that for younger children, probably 6 and under, it could be scary. It could also be something that they love. But the show I also really enjoy, and would say that I could recommend that to families. It's very good. It does deal with, I don't know if any of you who are watching have seen some of the old Lord of the Rings animated movies. We kind of grew up with those, and I still love them, as cheesy as they are, because the story behind how they made the Lord of the Rings version of the animated series is wild, because they shot a lot of it with real people and then just colored it in and had big plans for it and really went all out. But I would say that this show is like that, probably more like The Hobbit, to where there is some stuff that could be kind of scary, but it's dealt with in a very G-rated way, but in a way that allows you to see the real good versus evil conflict. So that's been fun. It's been fun, and not as much of a commitment. You could probably watch both seasons in a weekend if you were really ambitious.
Probably, yeah.
Have you seen any of those shows?
I've seen the first season, and we just watched the first episode of season 2. We'd been watching them with some friends who didn't have internet, and so they would come over and they'd watch the episodes with us. And so then when season 2 came out, we were waiting and waiting and waiting. And then I recently found out that they had internet, and they went ahead and watched season 2 without us. So now we're kind of, I guess we got to catch up. But yeah, so we were waiting, and then I found out that they'd watched it, and that kind of took the wind out of my sails. And then it was like, and then I kind of like forgot about it because we were watching other things. And
right on. Well,
it's a good show. I like it.
Yeah, it's good. How about another show that you guys are watching or have watched?
So the other show that we've been watching recently, and we're almost done with it, is we've been watching Psych with the kids, which is kind of
yes. Now,
which is kind of totally different.
Did I not introduce you to Psych?
You did.
Okay.
You introduced me to Psych. I was going to say that. This is a show that you originally recommended to me.
Did you get into it right away, or did it take a few episodes? Because it is a unique brand of humor.
Yeah, it is a unique brand of humor. It is my brand of humor.
Yes.
So actually, while I thought that the pilot episode was a little slow, I enjoyed the premise. So the
Yes.
premise, for those of you who haven't seen Psych, is you're following Sean Spencer. He's the main character, and he's basically, his dad was a cop, and his dad kind of basically taught him to be extremely observant and to put things together because he really wanted his son to be a cop as well and follow him, follow in his shoes and become a detective. And so he spent his entire childhood teaching Sean various tips and tricks and ways to view the world, partially because he wanted him to be a good detective and partially because he saw a giftedness in his son that I don't think Sean even really appreciates until he turns about 32. So
Such as
so you
life.
see these like flashbacks of Sean and Gus, his best friend, and Sean's dad, and there are moments where you're like, wow, how could you like treat your son that way in some ways, right? Like he's got him hooked up to a lie detector test at some point, right? And he's like, is this legal? He's 9, right?
It's
But
very over
then
the top.
yeah, it's very over the top. It's very just
But
kind of
it
ridiculous
usually comes in very specifically to be something that
that saves Sean's life.
saves his life.
Right. So you're like, oh, well, maybe his dad wasn't being mean. Maybe he was just like aware of what was out
maybe,
there.
maybe I
So
need to go buy a lie detector machine for my family.
maybe, yeah. So Sean is he's brilliant. He's kind of a Sherlock Holmes in that he can see things about people and make connections, and he's a lot more personable than Sherlock is ever shown. And it wasn't until I started like sitting down thinking about how would I talk about the show that I started seeing, oh, there's like a Sherlock Holmes parallel here. Just very zany though. And he's had like 37 jobs since he left high school. He took the police detective exam and totally aced it. He took like the lawyer's exam and aced it, but it just never stuck with any particular job. And so when you meet him, he is mostly making money by watching the news and calling in anonymous tips to the police to tell them that they're wrong about who did it. And then he goes in, and then if they make an arrest, he goes in and he gets like a finder's fee. Well, he makes a one of these connections in such a way that nobody believes that he could possibly know that without being involved. And so now he's facing, the police want to arrest him and bring him in for questioning. And so, kind of in a fit of desperation, he claims to be psychic. And that's how he knew. And they buy it. And so then he runs over to his best friend's house and is like, we're starting a detective agency, a psychic detective agency. And so that's the premise of the show, is them working together with the police and eventually also Sean's dad on all of these different cases. And Sean is always making these zany, ridiculous accusations at the beginning and then basically being proved to be right, later on. But it's a show that is fast paced. It's very funny. It's all witty humor, which I love. I love that it doesn't rely on crude humor at all. And it's there are some very sweet moments, and you kind of get to watch Sean kind of grow up while not losing who he is, which I think is cool. I wouldn't say it's a kids show. My kids are, I have a 16-year-old. I have 2 teenagers now. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And a lot of the stuff goes over the boys' heads, which is good. They're the younger ones. They're 10 and 7, but they think he's fun. They think Sean is funny. They think Gus is hilarious. They always love it whenever anything explodes. And it's fairly clean, especially the first 6 seasons. Season 7 and 8 got a little bit more. It was stuff that was already happening, and that the characters were already making kind of what my daughter's friend would call bad morals type choices, but it's a little more overt about it. So you can't quite like shove it off to the side. It's like, oh no, but it's been good to talk to the kids. It's like, you shouldn't live together before you get married. The world's going to tell you that that's fine, but do you think it's a good idea? And they're like, no. So it's good to have those conversations with your kids and have those conversations while they're still here and they can still talk to you and ask you questions. And sometimes it is good as they're getting older, to watch some shows and to read some stories that kind of tell them what the world is like, and then also say, you don't have to be like that. You don't have to make those decisions. And I think that's been really good for my kids anyway.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that in the first episode, but reading as a family, listening to music as a family, watching movies as a family, and watching shows as a family, a passive it's not a passive deal. If you just turn the television on, you just get whatever the television gives you. But what I love about choosing your entertainment is that that's what you're doing. You're choosing it. And so you can decide what is right for your kids and when. And if there is a movie that is mostly good but has some hard topics or hard things in it, it's something that you can talk about. We've had a few times like that. I remember we watched Remember the Titans as a family. Love that movie. It's a great movie. But it brought up topics that my kids really probably unaware of, the topic of racism or even that time period in America. And so it was good because at first I was like, oh, this is actually gets pretty intense. And I don't know if they're quite ready for this. And I'm not saying I made the right call or not, but we did stop it. We just talked about the history of our country and what was going on and just showing them this is so wrong. And was cool to be able to have that conversation with them around a movie that's really fun and that we enjoy. So even in a show like Psych, which is funny, it's an opportunity to talk to our kids. And what I love about the show, again, it goes back to the characters. Sean and Gus are so good together. They play off each other so well. Gus is mostly playing, just very serious, also equally smart and brilliant, but very rule following, very the opposite of Sean. Yes. But he has just great moments and steals a lot of the scenes that he's in. And their dynamic together is great. Yeah. Both Sean and Gus's dynamic with Sean's dad is great. His dad is a wonderful addition to the show. And all of the side characters like Lassiter, you gotta love him.
Oh, and
anyways,
you really love fun. Like Lassiter is often portrayed as he's the lawful good, right? Like he would be Javert in Les Miserables, right? And so there is no room for mercy. There's no room for grace. There's no room for shenanigans.
No room for silliness.
No room for silliness. But he comes to appreciate what Sean brings to the table. And he comes to, and it's fun because you always love those moments when Lassiter actually succeeds and you realize he's cool. Right. Like there are these moments where he's like, he has his moments. Right. And it's great. And you love it because you love him and you want him to succeed. And it's as much as he sees his relationship with Sean as a rivalry, Sean doesn't really. Sean's like, you do your thing over there and you follow the book and I will be over here doing everything that you would just like have a fit about, but we'll figure out who the bad guy is together.
I always love those dynamics when you have two characters that are either really annoyed by each other or maybe even loathe each other, where through the progression and as they go through the story, they become either able to appreciate the other or even friends in some points. And so when you start to see that they do care for each other, even though that edge is always there because they are so different. So they're always, Sean is graded on Lassiter. I don't think Lassiter has any effect on Sean whatsoever, which is great. It's what you love about Sean. And Sean he's brilliant. And so very often he sees a detail that he notices and he wants to tell somebody, but he has to play like, oh, I'm getting a psychic vision, or I have to play this up dramatically, how I present this information that I just discovered. And you see how he notices. The show does a great job of showing you how he is noticing these details as he enters the room. Very Sherlock Holmes-like. Yeah. But the added element of, I can't just tell them, I have to make a big show of it.
A little bit of this, whole lot of that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And I think it's one that you could, if episode 7 from season 5 popped on, you could just watch it and not have any context and probably be able to enjoy it. So you could pop in and watch certain episodes.
I think as long as you kind of understood the premise, I think you'd be fine watching just about any episode. I will say, there are a couple of places where there are series of episodes. They're not next to each other or even necessarily in the same season. So that's kind of fun because sometimes they'll have callbacks to things. So like, for example, Carrie Elwes, who plays Wesley in The Princess Bride, shows up in 3 or 4 episodes as the famous art thief, right? Jacques Devereaux. And it's
great.
He is fabulous. Every episode with him is my favorite, partially because it's Wesley and The Princess Bride is my favorite movie of all time, but partially just because he does such a good job playing this elegant bad guy. And you know,
He does. He does.
like a gentleman doesn't keep his firearm next to his socks. That would be uncouth.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It's just a lot of fun. And it is. So when I first discovered that show, and this just kind of tells you where I'm at in terms of the shows that I like to watch, either with my kids or just with my wife or by myself, is a lot of times I just want something not mindless, but just pure entertainment. And so Psych was one of those shows where I just loved it because you could just turn it on and have it just be fun and funny and then move on.
Yeah,
and
then
not
move on
feel
with your day.
and not feel like, oh, if I don't watch the next 30 episodes, like I will never know what is happening.
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure.
so I enjoy those types of shows a lot. So yes, Psych is definitely on the list. I don't think my kids are quite to the age where they could appreciate it, but it's one that it'll be fun to share with them down the road for sure.
Well, and that one's fun because you kind of get a feel sometimes from outside sources because like what your family might be interested in. So I love this show. I've watched it a couple of times. And sometimes I'll just, like you said, you could just go in and pick up an episode. I want to watch this episode right now. I want to watch the episode where, you know, they find a dinosaur skull. You know, let's watch that episode. That's my favorite. So you know, it's one that I was like, yeah, it'd be fun to watch with the kids someday, but it really wasn't on my radar as one to watch as a family that we're good friends with. They have, their oldest is a little bit younger than Liana. They're in the same grade, but she's a couple months younger. And then they have 3 daughters. And so their youngest is 12 and their oldest is 16. And they were like, oh, we're watching Psych together. And I was like, oh, wasn't really on my radar as a family show, but they like a lot of the same things we do. They have a lot of the same kind of, you know, rules about what they watch as we do. And so I was like, oh, maybe that would be one to watch. And so I kind of originally thought about just watching it with the girls, and we watched the first episode. So the boys missed the first episode. But then both of the girls were like, I think Brant and Graydon would actually really like this. And so we did start watching it as a family. And there is like one series, I think it's a trilogy, and it's broken up across a couple different seasons. It's the Yin Yang series, and that I think is like, I did not let the boys watch those episodes because I feel like psychologically those ones are a little bit darker. They are probably some of the best writing in the show, but it's like I think you need to be a little older. They were very upset and disappointed about that, but you know, I was like, you will get to watch these when you're a little older.
For sure. For sure. I think that's wise.
Yeah.
That's wise.
It's kind of like I always told my dad, I've always told our dad, you know, he forgets that I tell him this, but one of the lessons that I really appreciated him teaching us at an early age was, if you don't like something, you can turn it off.
You know, we were just talking about this the other day. And yes, for families out there watching, I can't tell you, there have been a number of times growing up and even now as an adult where we're excited to try new things. My kids could watch, we did growing up, we watched Aladdin every day for I think 2 years. Not really, but my kids could watch the same movies over and over again, but I want to introduce them to new stories. And sometimes I want to see new stories. So there are times where I'll pick something out either based on a review or a recommendation, and we'll get into it, and it's either not for us or it's, whoa, this is just not got content that I think I want to put in front of my kids right now. So we'll just turn it off and switch to something else. And we've done that a number of times. And even some movies where I will show it to them eventually, where have started it and been like, ooh, you know what? We're not ready for this. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's good. And we there's a movie that is out there. I believe it is called Shiloh, that our father brought home for movie night at least a dozen times, to the point to where we started to see it and be like, Dad, come on. We've gotten 5 minutes into this movie 11 times and turned it off. And I have no idea if this movie's still out there or what it's about or if it's any good. But on the back, it says, in the vein of Homeward Bound. So I know why he got it. Because again, you're like, oh, I want more of that. We loved Homeward Bound. How could you not?
Someday yes. I do want to watch that whole movie and just see if it got any better after 5 minutes, because I really don't know
I have
what
no
the movie
idea.
was about, or
I have no
but
idea.
I think we turned stuff off, and we would go to the movie. Like, we would pay for our movie tickets and we would go to the movie, and sometimes we walked out. And that was back before they said you could have your money back if you walked out within 30 minutes. Like, I think, very possibly our family is part of the reason that policy exists in movie theaters, because there were quite a few movies that we paid money for, and we walked out, and it impressed on me at a young age that just because you paid for something doesn't mean you have to like it, and doesn't mean you have to keep it, and doesn't mean you have to stay in the theater and endure it. And I think that was a fabulous lesson. I know I've talked to some of my friends who are, they'll be like, we went to this movie and it was awful. It's like, well, why didn't you leave? What? You can do that? Like,
Again,
yeah,
it's not passive. It's not passive entertainment. You have a choice. Yeah. Our dad takes things like justice and honor and integrity very seriously.
You know how Inigo
And
Montoya is told by Count Rugen that he has an overdeveloped sense of injustice?
yes,
That's our dad.
and there's a moment that whenever I remember it, it just makes me laugh. And I wish I could find this young man, because we were watching, I believe it was the movie Artificial Intelligence, which can't remember anything about it, but it was not for kids. And I think my dad was excited to go see this new Steven Spielberg movie. And it was rough and I think crude and seedy. And so we did. We got up and we left. As we're leaving the movie theater, he was upset about it. Now, Steven Spielberg was not at the movie, so he couldn't give his thoughts to Steve. But who was there was a young 16-year-old boy who was working for the summer, probably trying to buy a car, just getting a job, trying to do the right thing, who takes the tickets. That was his job. That was his role in this movie being released to the public. And as
Possibly sweeps the floor later.
maybe. But that's all. That was the extent of his involvement in this production. But as we're leaving, and my dad is frustrated because, for a lot of reasons, he sees this young boy. He just goes over to him and says, "You should be ashamed of yourself." And we left. And I don't know that it probably even connected with him that we were upset about this film. I think it was just some random man coming over to him, probably not at the high point of his life, taking tickets, and gave him this tidbit on which to hold. But
I hope
he's okay.
He went on. I hope he went on to be like an entrepreneur or something.
Yes, I hope he is working on making films that we can all be proud of. But as funny as that is, it is how seriously my dad and our family took family entertainment, because you do want to be careful with what you present to your kids. And like I said, like you have been sharing with us, not wanting to like raise them in a bubble. And it is a good way to introduce things, to have conversations, but also wanting to, like the Bible says, thinking about what is true and lovely and good. And that's what we are searching for. And sometimes you find those elements in shows that have other stuff in them, and that's disappointing. So, like I said at the beginning, we want to share the things that we love, that we can share with you wholeheartedly. But it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of like watching different things that we can't wholeheartedly recommend. Sometimes there's shows where it's like, man, there's great elements. I've talked to you about this. I've talked to Dad many times about, man, that movie just missed it. It could have been brilliant, but it just missed it because of other elements that get put in or things of that nature. So anyways, that was a tangent.
Well, and we want to be honest, right? We want to be honest about the things that we enjoy, and we want to, so that's why there will be some things that we recommend that have caveats, that you can make that decision on your own. Your kids, your family, what your family can handle. We're not going to recommend anything that's, foul or vile or vulgar or anything like that. But there will be things where it's like, this show, for example, Psych, has moments where the character makes choices that we wouldn't make, but you're going to run across people who make choices that you don't make. Your kids are going to run across people who make choices that they would never make, that they know that you would not be okay with them making. and they need to know how to interact with those people in a grace-filled way as well, right? And not just be like, well, you're a sinner, right? Because that isn't going to win anybody to the kingdom.
For sure. And understanding that poor decisions have consequences and seeing those play out. It's talked about with my kids, wanting to allow them some freedom to make decisions now while the consequences are very minimal. A small
Right.
story. Last summer, we just moved into a new house. It's surrounded by apple orchards, and there's roads that go all the way around the house. And the boys came and said, "Hey, we want to ride our bikes around the house or around the orchard." So I told them, "Yeah, go ahead." And it just had occurred to me that it was early spring, and they had put boxes for bees all around these orchards to pollinate the trees, which is something that they do for the apple trees in the area, all the trees in the area. And so I knew that they were out in the orchard. So I told the boys specifically, "Hey, when you guys go riding around, just watch out for those boxes, kind of give them a wide berth and leave them alone." So let them go. And a little bit nerve wracking because I hadn't really been out there at all, but just wanted them to, they felt like they were going on this grand adventure, pure freedom. They were so excited. So they get on their bikes and they take off. They're gone for 30 or 40 minutes to the point where I was starting to think, maybe I should go look and see what happened. Next thing I know, I see them coming down the road and they're walking their bikes and I can hear them from probably 200 yards off crying, just sobbing. So they come in and it is apparent that they have been stung each number of times by bees. So we're trying to get them patched up a little bit and calmed down. And by the time we get them calmed down, I asked them, "Boys, like, what happened?" And they both kind of stopped and started looking at each other and giggling. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we found the bee boxes, and we grabbed some sticks. We went to go do battle with the bees." And I was thinking about it later, thinking that, man, that was great. We were given instruction, but then given the freedom to make a decision. They made the wrong decision and they saw immediate consequences.
Yeah.
But the consequences were they got stung.
Right.
And so they'll remember it.
Yeah.
Although later that summer, I was telling them to watch out for an area where there was a lot of bees, and they both yelled back, "We're stronger than those bees." So I don't know if they learned the lesson, but
maybe didn't stick.
but the point is, I liked them being able to see consequences when the consequences weren't as severe as they will be with decisions that come down the road. So it's good.
Right.
So I like that. And talking about shows that I love, but that are starting to deal with things that are more serious, this to me is a show that has kind of taken my kids a little further into the progression of being able to see more complex story, more complex characters. We started watching, based on your recommendation, the show Troll Hunters, and absolutely loved it. I would guess, speaking of my history with shows in general, that I have maybe finished 5 or 6 series in my life. And this one was probably the one that we have finished the fastest. We usually don't do any watching of shows during the week, but we even made some exceptions for that for this show, like nights here and there, weeknights. Usually we do all of our reading during the week, and then Fridays and Saturdays are the days where we watch either movies or shows. But the kids got into it immediately. Troll Hunters. So the premise of the show is you have James Lake Jr. and his friend Toby, and then a girl who becomes friends with them later in the series, Claire. Normal kids living in Arcadia, not aware that there's an underworld of trolls, that there's a battle going on between the trolls who want to come back and like rule the upper world. And there is always chosen a specific being to be the troll hunter, who basically is protecting the dynamic of keeping the bad trolls from hurting the good trolls, but also keeping the bad trolls from infiltrating the human world. And it's always been a troll, but for some unknown reason, Jim Lake, who's got to be 12, 13 years old, I'm guessing, is chosen as the next troll hunter. And just there's the fun side of it because he's dealing with life as a junior hire, and all of a sudden being this warrior of a fantastical world. at the start of the show, he's wanting more from life. He wants a bigger purpose. He's seeking for that adventure, and this falls in his lap. And at first, it's very much like, whoa, I didn't want this, but it is awesome how he grows through this. And the characters, the dynamic between Jim and his friend Toby, it's a lot of fun. They're very silly, they're very junior high, but they're also just such loyal friends and so good. And then when Claire comes into the group, Jim really kind of likes Claire, and so it's super shy and awkward around her, and that's kind of fun as they're dealing with trying to protect her from all these evil things that are going on, but not wanting her to become aware of it. And so it's kind of this thing of, when is she going to become aware of what's really going on? And that's great. Jim's mom is awesome. And then what's the teacher's name?
Uh, Professor Strickler.
Professor
Mr.
Strickler.
Strickler, yeah.
And he's great. Our favorite characters, Jim, Toby, Claire, and then the trolls who kind of become their guides into this world of being the troll hunter, which are Arg and Blinky. And their dynamic, those five together, Blinky, Arg, Jim, Toby, and Claire, is wonderful. And just the fun way that they are kind of introducing each other to their respective worlds, which is by proxy telling us, the viewers, what's going on in the story, in the world. It's just really well written. It's really, the characters are just great. It's just a lot of fun. And then there is a story that takes you all the way through. So it is episodic, but there is a very clear story, and it's a very light versus dark, good versus evil story. And that's where, for me, the caveat would be is it does deal seriously with good versus evil, and there are complexities. Professor Strickler is a perfect example of someone who is charming and you like him, but then you realize that he is, what you would say, I guess, bad. But then you start to realize that his character is more complex. He's kind of just doing whatever is best for him. But as the story is going, he isn't just staying there. All of these characters are growing, whether it's Jim learning to go from timid to brave to confident to leading. You have Strickler, who's going from just evil and dark, nefarious, to kind of just doing whatever's best for me, to spending time with Jim and his friends and his family, to the point to where he ends up like choosing to help them. And so it's actually quite wonderful. But there are some things where it gets kind of dark. And there was a few episodes where it either just got so serious, or the portrayal of the darkness was a little bit much for where my kids were at. And so there was a few where we kind of skimmed to get through certain parts. But I was good with that, because it was just showing that contrast. For the good to be good, for the brave to really be brave, there had to be something scary. And for the right decisions to really stand out, you had to see how they were compared to the wrong ones. And it was always very clear the bad was bad and the good was really good. And that was really fun to go through with my kids. And it was really fun that they loved it and that they loved the right things about it. And I love that, because especially for my boys and for Reese, like getting to the point in their lives where they're having to start making courageous decisions, standing up for what's right, paying attention to decisions friends are making, and all of those kinds of things, being kind to people, being there for people, being loyal to your friends. Like, those are the things that they're starting to deal with. And so to have a show where it walks you through those kind of story elements was really fun. And we really enjoyed it. And we started, I don't know, I was going to ask you, because we finished the show. And again, it was just, man, we want to spend more time with these characters. And so there's other spin-offs of the show, I guess. I think there's one that the kids started watching called Wizards. And just because it's not the main show, I haven't seen many episodes, but I've wanted to kind of see, like, is this a continuation? Like, will it be as good because some of the characters are the same, or will it be different and not as good? I'm not sure. So I can't say about the spin-off shows if those are entertaining or not. But it is a little bit scary. I would say my kids that are watching it, 7, 9, and 12, and a few episodes that we did have to skim through because of elements that were a little scary for the 7 and 9-year-old. And even my daughter would probably say she's fine skipping through some of that stuff. But for the most part, just really good. And was good for where they were at in the type of things that we're watching and reading. It felt not as serious as say Lord of the Rings, but it felt like we're jumping towards the later books in the Harry Potter series is where we're at reading, thinking like the Hobbit in terms of the type of stuff that's in the Hobbit, those kind of elements. So if your kids are at a point to where those are the kinds of things that you can read or watch together as a family, then I would say this would be something that you would really enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we watched those. We watched them when we were still in the apartment, so it would have been at least 5 years ago. So my kids were about the same age as your kids now, although we did have they would have been younger, so the younger ones would have been younger. But yeah, we love Troll Hunters, and I believe we watched the spinoff Three Below. We haven't watched Wizards yet. It's on
Okay.
our list. Three Below is fun. It's not as good. It does follow different characters, but you meet those characters in Troll Hunters, and they kind of pass through Troll Hunters, and you're like, okay, that was a little weird. What was that all about? But it doesn't matter. And then you watch Three Below, and you get the backstory. So Three Below is actually running simultaneously with a lot of what's happening in Troll Hunters.
Gotcha.
So you'll see shots in the background of Three Below of things that are happening, and you're like, oh, I remember that episode, which is cool. So I haven't heard anything about Wizards, good or bad. I've just heard that the movie that they wrote to wrap everything up is not probably something I'm going to enjoy, but I don't know why.
Gotcha. Well, so
I've just been told that the movie is horrible and don't watch it, but nobody's told me why. So might watch it on my own and see why.
The creator of the story is Guillermo del Toro.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say if you've seen any of his movies, think Pan's Labyrinth, Pacific Rim,
The Hobbit.
He was involved in The Hobbit, but kind of.
It was mostly his vision.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So a lot of those types of elements, he is a wonderful storyteller. But some of his choices are strange to me. I think back to Pacific Rim, which was a movie that I thought, how could I not just love this movie? It's giant robots doing battle, which is all I want to see. And those elements were great. But there was certain characters that were so off the wall bizarre that I just couldn't get past them. Yeah. So the storytelling is wonderful. And like I said, I was very interested in getting into the next shows just to stick with the characters, and maybe the characters will come back into the show in Wizards, but in the first 2 episodes, some of the main characters were missing or were frozen in ice or something. Oh. And sometimes sequels or books will do that where they write off the main characters, or like I said, they may come back, but with them not being there, it took some of my interest out of it because of how much so much of the show that I loved were the characters that you just come to want to spend more time with.
Totally agree.
All right, so we want to talk about one more show, one that we have both watched or are watching that is a lot of fun. Janelle, go ahead and introduce it to us.
All right, so we talked about my favorite all-time live action television show, and now I was talking with the kids about, what would or occasionally, somebody will say, what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite TV show? And whenever they ask about TV show, I say, well, live action or animated, because the answer is different. And so the other day they were like, oh, that's a good distinction.
That's just your way of being able to have 2 favorites. When I asked Janelle leading up to this episode to have a couple shows, she said, how many can I bring? And I just responded with Mr. Arnold from Jurassic Park, Samuel L. Jackson's character, about 2 million. And I think she could have.
Yeah, maybe not quite 2 million, but I did have about double the things I could have talked about. But I kept it very much to the things we're watching right now. And I'm not even mentioning one of the things we're watching right now because I haven't seen it all yet. But
this is my favorite movie set between the 16th and 17th century that is 50% sci-fi, 40% fantasy. Yes, you have a favorite in each genre and every time period.
This is my favorite movie made in July of 1996. Okay.
Okay, fair enough. You don't have to pick a favorite. Okay, it's as simple as that. You don't have to.
That's great.
But you say wholeheartedly that this is your favorite animated
TV show ever. is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I introduced you and your family to it. I think I just bought it for you because you told me you hadn't watched it, and I was like, that has got to change. So I love the animated Avatar: The Last Airbender. A lot of people who've watched it, they love it as well. It's just such a fun.
It's
It's
got some
three
fans.
seasons. It's got some fans, a few. It's 3 seasons. And they only wrote 3 seasons of story, and they wrapped everything up, and they
I love
refused
that.
to get trapped in the idea that they have to drag it out for 12 or
Beat it to
15 or
death.
27 seasons, and it's very, and it has it again, it's like 26 episodes in a season, so there are a couple of episodes that are just a little silly or a little disconnected and a little episodic, but that's okay. And so you're in a world in Avatar: The Last Airbender where people have the ability to bend certain elements. So you've got earth, air, fire, and water. And in every generation, there is one person who can bend all 4 elements, and that is the Avatar. And their job is to basically keep the world at peace. But in this world, the Avatar disappeared 100 years ago, and nobody knows what happened to him. And a couple of kids at the South Pole discover a young boy and a large flying bison, not making this up, frozen in a big ice ball, and they help him get out, and he is the Avatar. But he went flying off because he got scared about being the Avatar, and so he ended up stuck in ice for 100 years. Meanwhile, the Fire Nation has attacked, and the world is at war, and everything's a mess. And now everybody's looking to him to solve all their problems. And he's like, "I'm a 10-year-old kid." So give me a minute. So anyway, so we love the show, and Netflix just came out with the first season of the live action version of this show. So I'm
What
actually,
did What'd you think of that? Have you watched any of that?
yeah. So we just finished watching the first season, and season 2, I think, is not coming out till 2026, but it is coming. And when they decided to make a live action, I am very skeptical. I'm not a huge fan of the trend of taking cartoons and turning them into live action movies, because a lot of times they're taking cartoons that I thought were perfectly wonderful and just redoing them. And I don't understand the point. I feel like it's a little lazy. This is me getting up on my soapbox a little bit, but some of that is because I'm an indie author. And some of that is I've found that, like, in the traditionally published world of books and movies, the creativity is seeming to get scarcer. And so, when I see more and more things going, "Oh, we're just going to remake that," and it's like, why? That was already great. Take a chance on a new story.
Yeah, or because and think of some of the stories that you've written. You can do retellings, but if you're trying
Yeah,
to, like the Lion King, do almost a take for take rehash
right.
and lose some of the elements that made the original so loved, that just seems like,
Yeah,
what were you trying to do that was different? What were you bringing to this story that was different?
right.
Or you do it in a way that is so different, and you forget or neglect all the elements that made the first one so loved. So I don't think there's anything wrong with telling a story, but bringing something new to it, something fresh. Like, there has to be a reason. Why are you retelling this? And when it's done wrong, it just seems so blatantly obvious that it's done because, ooh, we know everybody that loved that will go pay money to see this. And that just is the wrong heart from which to tell a story, I think,
Oh, exactly.
if that's where it's
And
coming from.
this particular show had already been done as a live action movie,
No,
and it
I
was
think
horrible. It
no,
was
I don't think
horrible.
so. I think
No.
there was no movie ever
Oh,
made.
there what? You're right.
Yeah,
You're
never
right.
happened.
I'm thinking about a totally different movie. Um,
The myth, internet myth. One
never
of those,
existed.
what do they call that, where
Don't
you
go
all have the
looking for it.
same experience, the something effect, where everybody believes that there was a movie made, but really it's not true.
I don't know what that effect is called, but I agree. I agree. So anyway, so but the kids and I were looking for something to watch, and so we decided to give the live action TV series a try, and we really liked it.
Really?
It wasn't. It's not the same. In a lot of ways, it is. Like, it's the same story, it's the same characters, it's not told in the same way because each season is only like 8 episodes. So you miss out on some of the zaniness, you miss out on some of the things that, you know, maybe made the story so endearing in the first place. But you're still getting kind of the basic story. They still do some callbacks to things that you'd recognize if you saw the cartoon. I think one of the things where it suffers a little bit is that I don't think the creators of the show could quite decide if they wanted to make this show strictly for new fans or strictly for people who'd already seen the cartoon. Because I think their goal was you could watch this and not have to have seen the cartoon. And I don't think that they hit that target. I think that this show would probably have confused me if I had only seen this version of it. So I recommend watching the cartoon first. But the actor they got to play Sokka is worth watching all 8 episodes just for him.
Well, he's my favorite character in the cartoon.
Yes.
I was going to ask, just watching the trailer, it seemed like a fairly serious take. And one of the things that I love about the show is, I wouldn't say the silliness, but the fun of it, the lighthearted nature of Aang, the airbender, the fact, or the avatar, dealing with very serious stuff, but just dealing with it through the innocence of a child.
Yeah.
That I love, that is great. And so some of it is very, very funny and very silly, but Sokka is my favorite character because I just feel like I can relate to how he is going through life. Nothing goes the way he has planned. He's very serious, has high aspirations, and so often life just lets him down. But I have to say, when you introduced us to this show, I went in very skeptically. when I got it, I'm not very familiar with this style of animation. And so when I saw it, I'm just thinking, this looks like Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z type animation. And when we started watching it, I did not want to like it. In fact, I had made up in my mind that I'm not going to enjoy this show. So the fact that myself and my kids love this show should say a lot, because the story is just this wonderful, complex world that they create that's unique, that's different from anything I've seen. I'm sure there's elements that are taken from many stories, but just really fun, but complex, simple enough that the kids can follow it and that I can follow my kids can follow stuff that's more complex than me. So I don't know why I would infer that it needed to be simple for them to watch it, but simple enough for me to understand while giving me elements of, oh, I see what's going on here, or what's going to happen here. Characters that start out, again, I love the complexity of these characters. What's his name? The Fire Nation, the prince and his uncle. Zuko
and Uncle Iroh.
Uncle Iroh. Their storyline is wonderful because they do such a great job of creating a villain that you're just like, oh, I want him to be defeated, to rooting for. And just seeing their stories is cool. And I haven't seen how it concludes, but already it's like, man, I know how I want it to end. So yeah, it was not something that I thought I was going to enjoy at all. We have a couple episodes where when friends come over where we want to show them something, the kids love the episode where they meet the bard. They have to go into the cave, and he's almost like a California surfer hippie dude. That his songs are hilarious. It's just funny. I mean, we are laughing just on the floor because it's that good. But there's goodness, there's heroism, there's courage and loyalty and all of the elements. But again, it just comes back to, you just love these characters. Aang and Sokka,
and I think some of
sister.
that Katara, I think some of that lightness and some of that kind of silliness is what really works in the cartoon and underscores the seriousness of what they're actually trying to accomplish, of what they're actually being asked to do. And the live action version loses that. It'd be hard to do and not be silly, I think. Right. And so I think that it's good that they leaned into the seriousness. I think some of the acting is a little wooden. Zuko is my favorite in the cartoon. He's one of my favorite characters ever. And the actor who plays him, I was watching and I was getting annoyed because he's so wooden and so it's, he's really leaning into that, like, I will show no emotion, right? And then there was a moment in, I think it might have been the seventh or eighth episode, near the end, and I went, oh, the actor's doing it on purpose, because he has a moment where he goes in and he's asking just a regular guy who runs a, I don't know if he's selling food or something. And he's asking this guy for information. And the guy is like, I don't have any information for you. And you see this flash of, I'm going to beat this out of him. I am going to blast him with my firepower. And then he glances back at his uncle, and his uncle just kind of, and so then he's like, and he very slowly reaches into his pocket and he pulls out this pouch of coins and he puts it down. And you can see how much of a struggle this is for him. And I was like, okay, the actor is trying to portray that this character is constantly out of his element. And so the lack of emotion is how he's portraying. And so it was one, because they'd shown a flashback where he had a lot of emotion. And I was like, what is happening here? This character is just going through life in this very wooden, this is how we are doing things. And clearly he can act, right? Because we've seen flashbacks where he proves he can act. And so that was a moment that I was like, that was actually very good acting. I really appreciated it. But yeah, the kid who plays Sokka hits every beat just right. And so highly recommend, once you finish the cartoon, highly recommend watching it just for him, because everything about the way that he plays his character is perfect. I would say that, yes, I can recommend the live action version. So far, we've only seen season 1, but I would definitely tell anyone to go watch through the cartoon first, and that'll take you some time. So by the time you get around to the live action version, you might be closer to being able to see season 2. So
yes, absolutely. And I would encourage you to take a chance on it. If you have watched a trailer or seen the cover and thought, I don't think that's for me, I would say give it a chance, because it is a lot of fun and it's good. And
it's super
our
clean.
Kids love it. And it has been a fun experience to enjoy this adventure that knew nothing about. It's been really fun to go through that with them, and they're really pumped about it. It's fun to know that the show has been good so far, because they will get a kick out of getting to watch that. But this is by no means all encompassing. There's so many shows out there. And as we are kind of wrapping up what we're watching, Jenelle, I lean on you quite a bit, just because your kids are a little bit, older than my kids. And so always looking and trying to create a list of, okay, what's something that we can jump to next? Because I want to have something ready. Nothing's worse than scrolling through stuff or getting to that point where you try something and it's no good. So if you guys listening in, we'll say this every time, if there's shows that you enjoy watching as a family, would love it if you would share those with us, because we'd love to give it a chance. We are by no means experts on this. We are by no means the final authority. Your guys' decisions will probably be different than ours. It's possible that some of the shows that we love, you may not care for, and that's totally fine. That's one of the wonderful things about just being able to enjoy all these different things, different personalities, your kids being at different points, but are always looking for these things to enjoy together as a family, because we want to go on these adventures together with them, whether it's something that we just love wholeheartedly, or if it's something that brings up topics that we can talk with and wrestle with together as we grow as a family. It's a lot of fun. And so again, I encourage you to share yours with us so that we can have something to look forward to. And if you have a chance and haven't watched any of these shows, you're in for a treat.
Yeah. And we can definitely talk about more TV shows. And, like Grant said, no, by no means is this any kind of exhaustive list. We've, put together 5 shows and talked way too long about all of them, but we really appreciate you all listening to us and sharing your TV shows and books and movies that you guys like with your families with us. And we look forward to bringing you more titles to consider and think about and look into in the future. But for now, thanks so much for coming in out of the storm and spending a little bit of time with us.